Welcome everyone! This is Collector's Cut, the collection. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
Buongiorno.
If that is your real name.
Man, after I watched this movie, I wasn't sure of anything anymore.
Welcome. This is our monthly movie review show. It is a companion piece to a regular weekly show, The Collector's Cut, but this is the show where we only do films that have been released in the Criterion Collection. And this month, we are looking at Charade from 1963, directed by Stanley Donen, and it stars Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn. It is what I would describe, and this is an odd description because I feel like most things you couldn't describe this way, but this is a comedic thriller, and
yeah,
I think that is the perfect description for it. Those things usually don't go together, but here they do. Here they very much do. The basic premise is that Audrey Hepburn plays a character named Regina, whose husband turns up dead, and all of a sudden a bunch of people from his life that she didn't know about start showing up looking for money that he might have hidden somewhere. And Cary Grant plays this stranger who kind of gets involved in her life, and it really quickly becomes a case of her not really knowing who to trust, but there's also kind of a rom-com style thing going on between the two leads. So yes. I'll leave it there. We'll save spoilers, of course, for after spoiler warnings and all that stuff, but we'll get into it. This is the first time you saw this, I assume?
Absolutely. I went into this completely blind. I had no idea what I was getting into, and let me tell you, when you say comedic thriller, it opens on the thriller and then smacks you in the face with the comedy about 5-10 minutes in, and it gave me some whiplash. I'll tell you that much.
And it never gives either of them up. Like, it's constantly going back and forth throughout the whole movie. Yeah, so I had seen this probably about a decade ago. I bought the Criterion Blu-ray when it came out. It looked interesting, and when I was laying out these movies for the first year or so of doing this show, I was like, you know what, I think we should put in something lighter somewhere here about 5-6 months in, and this was the perfect choice for that. So I guess without further ado, I'll just ask the simple question. David, what did you think of Charade?
I enjoyed it. I mean, just straight up, I enjoyed it. I think the biggest thing I can say about this movie is that on the thriller side of things, it consistently kept keeping me on my toes. I never felt like I was really... I mean, there were a few things I managed to predict, like, I'd say within 10 minutes of the reveal for each time, but, like, by the time I reached the end of the movie, they were still revealing things, and I didn't expect there to be any more. It just kept doing it over and over again. In terms of the comedy aspect of it, I got actual laughs out of this. Like, there are some movies that come out nowadays that I wouldn't say that I actually laugh at. They're supposed to be comedies, and I can recognize that jokes are being told, but it doesn't really get a hearty laugh out of me. This one got some actual laughs out of me with how clever it was.
Data from Star Trek. I can acknowledge that there is a joke being told, yes, but I have no emotional response to give.
Absolutely. The only thing that I was a little bit iffy on was the romance plot of it, but I think that's only because in the context of the movie, it's supposed to be like a week at most that all of this is taking place, and so it's just one of those like Disney problems where it's how do we make them fall in love as quickly as humanly possible.
Well, this is something, admittedly, I don't think it was as common by 63, but if you go back to the 30s, 40s, every love story feels like it's absurdly quick. Like, people are meeting each other and they're talking about marriage within like 3 days. That is just what movies were like back then. So I think it's just a kind of a holdover from that. I think this is a movie from a director. This is the director who did Singing in the Rain, for the record. You know this guy.
Oh, okay.
So this is, I think, is clearly someone who's a fan of classic film, which even in the time of the 60s, the classic film that was classic at that time, and that's probably where that comes from. I like this movie a lot. This was kind of a surprise to me. I think when I saw the poster and I got the Blu-ray, I think I was kind of expecting something kind of Hitchcocky. Obviously it wasn't Hitchcock, but I was sort of expecting that kind of vibe. And I think the upbeat nature of it and the way it has like this banter between Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant, which right away there's this back and forth that still mostly works today. Like, I don't think the romance elements are a bit dated in the sense of like the timeline and You know, like her character just sort of being whisked away with the feeling of love very, very suddenly. But the actual banter back and forth and I think because it is this weird tone where it's bouncing between the comedy and the thriller, I think it almost takes the pressure off a lot of the thriller, even though it actually ends up being quite good. A lot of the tense sequences where someone's hiding or being chased, or there's, you know, a fight to the death or whatever it may be, a lot of those end up being really well shot and quite moody with the use of shadows and things like that. But I think what's interesting is that you said that, you know, there was a few reveals that you maybe saw coming a little bit before they happened. I think what's weird is that because it is got this comedic touch to it and there's a lot of lightness and it feels playful. It feels like, you know, everyone's playing and enjoying the journey of playing out these characters. It kind of takes the pressure off the thriller and the twists working as well as they maybe would have to in a super serious movie. But to its credit, they actually end up working almost completely anyway. Like there's maybe, like you say, there's maybe a few things you can kind of see coming, but it's one of those things where by the time you get about halfway through the movie, you're almost like, okay, this is not a movie that's going to stop trying to like turn the tables every 10-15 minutes. So now it's almost like trained me to sort of try and see where the next little swerve's coming. And I think there's a couple that even in the first viewing I saw kind of coming as well, but I don't think it actually, if anything, by the time you get to the very, very end, it's almost like, of course, you sort of smile and say of course. That's kind of the attitude you have, I think, by the time you get there. So and it's good. You know, we mentioned the two leads, Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn, obviously titans of this time period. Walter Matthau is also in there. George Kennedy, who most people probably know from The Naked Gun. He's the second guy from that, as in not Leslie Nielsen. So, you know, it's got a cast. It's got a recognizable cast.
I definitely recognize Walter Matthau. I'm not sure what for, though. I have his filmography here.
Grumpy Old Man, Dennis the Menace. You know, he did stuff up until the 90s and stuff.
It was probably Dennis the Menace. I remember I watched that a lot growing up. So,
yeah. So, and James Coburn, who's in this, he seemed familiar to me. He was in The Great Escape, and he did a few films around this time period. But yeah, so it's got a pretty good cast. I think it's pretty well directed. Like the tense sequences work quite well.
I think you said earlier when you were going into this, you were expecting it to be some sort of like Hitchcock film, just based off of like the thing and all that. For me, the first thing I thought of based off poster and just the very first shots we have of this movie was North by Northwest. That was the first thing that popped in my head, which obviously is Hitchcock, and
Cary Grant as well.
So it had that going for me. And then that's why I say that once it hit the comedic bit, that it hit me so hard, because I try to stay completely unaware of even the genres of these movies going in. So when they started cracking jokes, I was like, was that a joke? Am I supposed to laugh at that? And it wasn't until we got to very early on the funeral scene where I was like, okay, no, this is just a straight up like comedy with thriller aspects to it. But then it kept on swaying back into the thriller with comedic aspects. Like it was truly straddling the line between those two genres.
Yeah, which I think it's a good thing to go into this one fairly blind, because it is so, you know, playing with your expectations. But again, in a very light, fun way. This is not trying to be, I don't know, I don't even know if I've got an example in my head of a twisty-turny movie that's constantly twisting and turning, but it's not trying to be a serious version of that. But I think the other thing about it is that I think it's a benefit to the film that it ends up not feeling like Hitchcock, that it ends up feeling like its own unique type of tone, its own unique thing. Not that Hitchcock would never have a little bit of comedy, but it never feels like this. This feels very distinct and unique, and something that's separate from all of those types of thriller. I think it's just because Cary Grant's in there, the poster looks like a Hitchcock poster, and the time period. I think you go in with some sort of expectation, especially if you've not seen a ton of movies of this time period, and Hitchcock is probably the one you've seen the most of from this era, just because he's Hitchcock. I think this was quite a little find, and it's not like a super obscure film in terms of release. It's a Universal Pictures film that Criterion licensed to release. Obviously, it's not one that Universal are necessarily championing that often themselves.
Well, apparently, it is public domain. Apparently,
really?
because of the way that they did the copyright in this, they didn't technically comply with how copyright had to be done at the time, and so it accidentally slipped into public domain.
It's a little bit of a Night of the Living Dead situation. But at least with Night of the Living Dead, that was a bunch of indie filmmakers who really didn't know better. The fact that Universal messed that up is quite funny to me. Now that you mention it, I think it is on like Tubi and stuff. Like it is on a lot of the free services, so it's not hard to find this one.
No, not at all.
Although amusingly, I don't think it's on the Criterion channel. So
I don't know.
Well, that is very weird if it is public domain, but obviously you can get the Blu-ray. It's on a lot of the free services and rentable in all the usual places. But yeah, no, I have a lot of fun. This was like a genuine surprise for me when I watched it, and just how much fun I had, and how much by the end I had a smile in my face. I had a good time. It takes you through the ringer, and it has moments with a lot of witty dialogue going back and forth, but then it has like quieter moments where someone's sneaking, across a window ledge or something like that, and both elements work.
I think the only thing that's going to be hit or miss, depending on how people enjoy it, is that romance subplot, in that it mostly overlaps with the comedy. It mostly plays it for funny moments and just two people enjoying each other's company. But there are moments where it takes a step away from the comedic aspect, and maybe it leans more onto the thriller side of things, but it takes the romance more seriously. It takes it more as like, okay, no, they're actually sizing each other up as romantic partners. And that's going to be hit or miss depending on how you think someone should be acting after 3 days or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's where you sort of go into, no, we're in a movie here. We're not in anything that's supposed to resemble real people.
Right.
And, it maybe does that maybe like 3 times throughout the movie. And I think because, like you say, it's tied so much to the comedy, I don't think you ever have much of an issue with it typically for most people, because it is tied to the comedy. It is meant to be played for laughs. It is meant to be this, fun, flirty kind of, larger than life. This is not how real people talk to each other, but that's part of the fun. This is not trying to be a down to earth drama with, serious messaging.
At the very beginning of the movie, when our characters are introduced to each other, they kind of just snap at each other back and forth.
Yeah.
And I know it comes way, way, way later, but it was reminding me of like Aaron Sorkin dialogue, where it's just everyone's got that one-liner just ready to go. Yeah, it's a little bit of that. But that opening dialogue, like immediately I thought was quite witty. Like, because the movie starts with her in the Alps. She's been on a little vacation with her friend and her friend's son, and she's basically saying that she thinks she's going to get a divorce. And as we learn throughout the film, she doesn't really know that much about her husband. He's a very private guy, and she's seemingly... So, I'll put it this way. Given what her previous marriage seems to be, it seems quite believable how she's jumping into a potential romance throughout the rest. I watched this with my girlfriend, and when they started really developing the romance, she's like, God, she doesn't know anything about him. Why is she falling for him? I was like, she didn't know anything about the last guy either. This seems pretty in character, all things considered.
Yeah, but those first few lines of dialogue, though, where she says she's getting divorced, that's how she introduces herself, and he says something back to her, and I think there's a line here where, what did she say? She has something about someone dying, right? Oh, she has no room for new friends because all the slots are filled, and he says, oh, well, if any openings appear and someone gets cremated, you let me know. And that's kind of one of the first things they say to each other. And it's just, there's a nice back and forth. It's fun. It's one of the things, well, like, because of the reveals that the film has, it clears up what might have felt like plot contrivances. And because I've seen this before, there's a moment where, she goes back to Paris, and he mentions that he also has gone back to Paris. But Paris is a big city. That doesn't mean they're going to bump into each other, obviously. And he intentionally shows up to see her at one point, and this is the sort of moment where, on a first viewing, you might go, "Oh, this is a bit like weird that he's showing up to see this relative stranger." But obviously, once you know about all the stuff that goes, the rest of the movie, obviously it's not that random. It's not that much of a chance thing. This has got more of a purpose behind it, and that's all fine. But I think it's interesting on the first viewing that some things that might feel like contrivances early on make more sense later when you realise that there was more motives behind it. So Yeah, no, I think it's a good fun time. It is almost 2 hours, but it's so well paced, I thought.
Yeah, I had to only pause it at one point, and that was just because I need to use the restroom. But it was zooming by. I never felt the length of the movie. It really did just kind of all the snappy dialogue, all the pacing for it. I will say there are, especially in the first half of the movie, if even the first third of it, very, very like smash cut sudden scene changes that take a while to get used to, but eventually they're played almost for those comedic bits where it's like, the stereotype of someone saying like, oh, well, I bet this will never happen, and then it like smash cuts into that situation. But the first part, when we're still getting a feel for the comedy of the movie, the sort of jokes they make, it comes across as very jarring.
Yeah, the ironic cut, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think we'll get into things. This is a movie that I don't think you can talk about too much before you're into spoiler territory, because it is revealing stuff constantly as the movie goes on.
The only thing that I would say is that they got nominated for a single Oscar, which is for Best Original Song for the song Charade, which, gotta be honest, didn't really recognize. I think this movie had a decent soundtrack, but it wasn't anything that was really standout for me.
No, I wouldn't say so. Most of the best moments play to silence, to be honest, because of the tense moments, and they don't have any music.
Yep.
Yeah, there's an opening title sequence, which is, it's got all these lines, very colourful. It's sort of going for this very...
It's like every 60s opening sequence. All the waveforms and colors merging together.
But yeah, from there, it's... I do think it looks good. I think it's a good-looking movie. There's a lot of nice... set pieces. The movie takes place. There's a lot of it takes place in a hotel. There's some stuff on a train. There's some stuff using France and Paris because there's a moment in the middle where she references the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and then she's looking past his shoulder, and he turns around, and the Notre Dame's like right there. So they're using their locations.
Yeah, I feel, especially when it comes down to the hotel, this movie did a great job with its geography of I knew exactly where I was at all times in this, and that really does help later scenes when the hotel becomes more full of characters and people are going into other people's rooms. It really gives you that idea, like, okay, no, they're this close by, and that means that this is going to happen, and it leads to a lot more interesting twists as the movie progresses.
Yeah, you understand the geography of, like, there's 2 rooms next to each other, there's another one down the hall, you know where the elevator is and what the lobby looks like, so there's a good layout to play with where when they start like chasing each other to other rooms and things like that, you understand like the distance and maybe how scary it is if something bad just happened this other room. So yeah, and yeah, it's interesting. I've never been in a hotel room that's had a connecting door between 2 rooms, but I see it all the time in movies and shit.
Yeah, I have been in one of those, but it was only in the situation where I'm never unlocking that door. I had no reason to go across, so...
Yeah. I presume that it locks on both sides, otherwise...
Yes.
Otherwise, that seems like a bit of a...
Well, it does in the movie as well. In the movie, we have them try to open it up at one of the characters opens up at one point. The other one's just like, what do you want? Why are you trying to get into my room? Yeah,
it's just always been an interesting concept to me, because I'm like... I get that it's like for people who obviously are traveling in groups and there's maybe 2 couples or, it's a family with 2 sets or whatever, and they're side by side and it's so they can interact with each other. But I'm like, is it really that much more effort to go into the hall, walk 5 feet and go to the front door of the room? I don't know.
I guess there's also no harm in having it either way, as long as you can get both sides.
Yeah, it's just, there's not a big deal with it either. It's just an interesting thing to me that someone thought of that as being a staple feature that they should have in hotels so that families can split up into 2 rooms. But hey ho, it is what it is. I guess I suppose it's, if nothing else, I imagine the largest use case for it is having like the parents in one room and then the kids sleeping in the side room. That's probably the most common use for it.
That's how it was used on the TV show Schitt's Creek.
I have never seen Schitt's Creek.
It's a very funny show. I think you would enjoy it.
I've heard that from other people. I may have to give it a try at some point. But anywho, that is give the spoiler warning and get into Charade. But obviously, it comes fairly well recommended, I would say, based on that opening conversation. And we'll get into the spoilers. So Charade, or how a woman is gaslit the entire movie by everyone she meets.
We don't even open on her being like the first time she's being gaslit. She's been gaslit for like years up to this point.
She has a history of being gaslit, and then she's continuously gaslit for the rest of the film. Now, obviously, it's all played, and it's all spies. It's people she can't trust, people she doesn't know, all that kind of thing. But it is played for kind of this nice light thing. By the time we get to the end of the movie with the big reveals with Cary Grant's character. Because Cary Grant, his character in this, he goes through like 5 names by the time we get to the end of the movie. He's introduced as Peter Joshua. He then becomes someone, Dial. I can't remember his first name.
Alexander.
There you go. And then he becomes like a James or something. And
yeah, that one slipped by me.
Yeah, I stopped paying attention to the new names at a certain point. It didn't really matter anymore.
Here, hold on, I got him. Peter Joshua, then Alexander Dial, then Adam Canfield.
There you go.
And then the final one for Brian.
Okay, it was 4. Okay, but still, he goes through a bunch of names because it keeps flipping who he's supposed to be.
Right.
And that's part of the movie, is that she doesn't know if she can trust him, and she goes from feeling lovey-dovey feelings to, oh shit, he might be dangerous, to, oh no, now I believe he's safe, even though he was lying before. Oh no, now he's dangerous again. Like, there's a lot of that.
I especially love the fact that it's never a thing of she finds out he's dangerous, and then only once he explains, like, no, actually, that's a fake identity. Here's the real one. Then she switches back to lovey-dovey. Like, it's always just a sudden jump where she slowly starts to like him, and then he changes identities. And then she slowly starts to like that identity, and then he changes it again. And it's just constantly like this building up of trust with whatever identity it is, only to reset it each time.
Yeah, it's this interesting thing where, like, it could almost start to feel trite, and if they did it one less time, it might. But there's that weird thing where, because they do it one extra time, it's like, okay, you're having just playful, silly fun with this now, and this is a recurring thing, as opposed to, if they just did like 2 twists, they'd be like, oh, is that second twist really necessary? But once you do it 3-4 times, it's like, oh no, this is a recurring motif. And now we're having fun with the motif. So, so like we said, the movie starts with a body coming off of a train, which turns out to be Regina's husband. But we're introduced to her, and they do this little fake out where there's like a gun aimed at her, but it turns out to be a water gun. Which, by the way, there's a reason why you don't give children fake guns that look real, because, bad things could happen.
Yeah, I think that was like an 80s or 90s thing when that really when that change happened. So back here in 63, it's like, nah, I got a real ass gun and I'm just pointing it at this woman's head in the middle of an open lot.
And this starts the running gag of the movie that Audrey Hepburn's character eats and eats and eats and loves to eat, despite being this very, very skinny woman the entire time.
There's a joke at some point, I can't remember where Cary Grant's character is like, oh, well, it's been a whole 5 minutes since you ate something. I'm sure you're starving.
Yeah. So, she's eating ice cream in certain scenes. She's sitting with she's eating, in fact, she's literally offered sandwiches from a relative stranger, and she accepts them. And these tiny little sandwiches with the crust cut off, they were really weird little things. I don't know what the logic is. This is a grown-ass man. If it's not even a grown, this is like a almost elderly man at this point, and he's having crust cut off his sandwiches. I don't know. Anyway, so we're interested to her. We're interested she wants a divorce, and she meets Cary Grant. It's kind of their meet cute, whatever. But then, of course, she goes home to find her relatively big sort of townhouse emptied. There's nothing there.
Well, it's implied that her townhouse was essentially like a full gallery. Like, it had paintings and stuff all over the wall. She had closets upon closets full of clothes, and just everything's gone.
Yeah, the husband was seemingly quite well off, which does put it into perspective, because the whole plot of this movie is about trying to get $250,000, about $250,000. And this guy seemed quite well off anyway. Like, I think in the modern world, like, I would just assume he had that in the bank account, based on this house.
That's fair. I want to see how much $250,000 was back in '63.
Oh, you mean how much it is now?
Yeah, like how much does it translate to?
Yeah. What's the equivalent here?
Hold on.
I imagine it's over $1 million in today's money.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. There's definitely been at least a 400% increase with that. Okay, so 1963, 25000. Calculate. Wow. Okay, yep, that's a full on like 10 times increase. It's $2.5 million.
Ooh.
So yeah, I can see why everyone was freaking out about that. That's
they wanted the money. Yeah, that's fair. So she finds out her husband's turned up dead. Policeman looks at her very suspiciously as he talks about all the things he had on him. Like, do you know where he was going? I don't know. Do you know who his friends are? I don't know. Do you know who his parents
are? Do you know
are?
his next of kin? Do you know literally anything about this man?
But it leads to probably the first standout scene of the movie, which is the funeral scene, where the only people there are Audrey Hepburn's character Regina and her friend that she works with, and the policeman who was like telling her about the husband's death, and he's sitting up the back, and it's an otherwise empty room, and the coffin's there, open casket. And then one by one, three strangers who, and this is, again, it becomes this rule of threes running gag, where in walks Tex, the tall American guy, and he comes in, he storms up the aisle, he goes up to the body, and he holds a little mirror under the nose because he's checking that he's really dead. And Regina's sitting there like, huh? Well, why is this man checking if he's really dead? And it's kind of this always revealed that, you know, she has no idea what this guy's past was. She doesn't know the sort of world that he was in. And then the second guy who came in is George Kennedy, his character Herman, and he comes storming down even angrier. He pricks him with a pin to make sure he's dead, and then just storms back out again.
And then, actually, no, he was the third one, because the first one was the skinny guy who
the old
sneezes all the time.
Okay. Oh, he was first, sorry. Yeah, he's still the most forgettable one, so I didn't even really think about his.
Well, I do want to point out, I especially love how this scene, because this is where it really sets up the comedy. I really do appreciate the fact of it's a completely empty room. It's just Reggie, the friend, and then the FBI agent in the back. And Reggie's friend is saying like, well, at least he knows how to behave at a funeral, because he's just sitting there with his hands in his lap. And then it does a cut to him trimming his fingernails there. And that was the first moment where I'm like, oh, okay, this is a comedy. Like, definitely for sure they're playing this for a comedic beat.
Yeah. I even just right before that beat, I like how Regina points out that if he just died in his sleep, we wouldn't even have the third guy. It would literally just be us two. So... You know, so this sets up that there's these interested parties and that this husband had a history. And after this, you know, she's back at the house, it's empty. Cary Grant shows up saying, oh, they read in the papers, because she did, you know, tell him her name and her husband's name. So at least at this point, you're led to believe that that's how he found her. Obviously, he knows more than he's letting on at this point, but that's okay.
What? I do like the intro at this point is they go full Monty with it, and they just keep him completely shrouded in shadow. It's like, okay, audience, you know you're not supposed to be trusting what he says, but like, let's run with it anyway.
Which leads to, well, he says, let's go get you a hotel, and he also takes her out to try and cheer her up, right? These are the events at this point in the movie. Which leads to the erotic pastime of passing oranges using only one's neck and jaw.
Which, it's such a good scene. It just immediately adds levity to everything going on. But I especially appreciate the fact that they almost overstayed their welcome with it. They like were really right on the edge of that, of, okay, the scene has gone on for a while now of Cary Grant just smashing his head into this woman's breasts, and it's a bit strange, but it just ended properly, where it actually ended up being an actually, I want to say heartfelt, but it's hard to be heartfelt in that situation, an actually genuine connection between the two lead characters in that moment.
So to just set this up, he doesn't start off with Audrey Hepburn. It starts off with this other woman who's clearly uncomfortable with the situation, because she does not help this. So the whole idea of this is that someone puts an orange in their neck, right, and sort of holds it with their chin, right, by leaning down. and the idea is you pass it to the next person. So it's almost like you're making a kissing motion, but with your neck to try and pass the orange. And this woman, who's this middle-aged woman, she's not big, but she's not skinny, right? She's like a sort of a little curvy, right? And she just stands there, almost leaning back, making his job harder, trying to get to the orange.
Yeah, I do want to point out the master of ceremonies for that, the guy who was running the game and introduced the rules, just picked her up because he needed even numbers for the team. So she didn't want to be a part of this anyway.
That's
she's
fair.
Just forced into this.
Yes, she's forced into what is borderline a sexual act.
Yes, absolutely. That being said, if we hit $10,000 on the Patreon, me and Pete will do that.
Sure. Sure. I mean, after the plane tickets, yeah, that's still $9,000 profit, give or take, for me, so that's fine.
And all it costs is our dignity. I'll take it.
Yep. So it's this thing where there's a lot of body comedy here, where the orange is kind of falling down this woman's chest, and Cary Grant's like sort of like grabbing it on her boob and like trying to like just awkwardly like hold it with his chin. I will say that there's at least one moment where that orange definitely fell. It's just because they cut away at the last second, and they're just sort of having us believe that he somehow caught it.
Absolutely.
But then he turns and he has to pass it to Audrey Hepburn, and it gets to that point where they realize they're really close, and there's almost a kissy moment, and it's like, okay, all right, so you've given us the romantic moment, and at least, even though I don't think it's that important because it is such a light-hearted film and it's playing it all very light and comedic, but it did at least tell us before her husband died that she wanted a divorce and that she felt like he was lying to her. So she already has trust issues, but at least it's not, she's upset that her husband's dead and now she's already moving on.
It's not a rebound thing.
Yeah, she was already out of that relationship. She was already mentally checked out. So I can appreciate that as a thing. So
yeah, for sure. But then she gets the orange, she turns around, and the guy she has to pass it to is one of the three guys who was at the funeral, which I think we skipped over the scene where she's called into the FBI, the embassy. That's what it was, the American embassy.
You're right. That was first already, yeah. That's where Matthau's character comes into.
Yes.
So he's Bartholomew, and he is CIA. He's not an agent. He points that out, that there's agents, because she keeps saying spies, and he's like, no, they're agents, not spies. Which
That's
is
a running joke over the whole movie, and I love it.
Well, it's a great payoff later, because she says at one point in a later scene that women make the best spies, and when he repeats.
Sorry about that.
When he repeats that back to her, he says spies, and she corrects him, just sort of very like deer in the headlights, agents. And it's like a really good little comedy beat that plays off this running gag that's been going back and forth. But so he sets up, okay, there's this $250,000 that these three other men that showed up at the funeral, they all want this. And he shows her a photo, and they were all in the military together during World War II. And they were tasked with trading $250,000 worth of gold to the Germans behind enemy lines, and they buried it instead, said the Germans stole it, but they basically buried it so they could go back and get it later. And that's what this is all about. This was, her husband had the money, they're all looking for it now he's dead. She's like the person they're all coming to, because, well, she must know where it is because she's the wife.
Yeah. It is worth noting, though, when she's informed of her husband's death, her husband left her a bag full of objects. Not even left her. He had that on his person on the train.
Yeah.
And it's
personal belongings that were evidence, basically.
Right. And in it is just like a bunch of random crap, comb, toothpaste, stuff like that.
Oh, actually, tooth powder.
Tooth powder.
Yes.
But
maybe that was more common back in the 60s, but I've never heard of toothpaste that was powder.
But the one thing that was actually meant for her was a letter that was stamped but unsealed, and inside was basically the letter just basically said like, "Hey, hope you're having fun on vacation. By the way, your dentist appointment changed." And they were like, "Well, we called the dentist to see if it meant anything." And it's like, your dentist appointment did in fact change.
Well, I love the way she phrased it. It's like, "And did you find anything out by contacting the dentist?" It's like, "Yes, we did. Your dentist appointment has changed."
Yeah.
It was a really good comic timing. So after this orange scene, she goes to make a phone call, if I recall, and Tex kind of like basically corners her in the phone booth and in no uncertain terms, kind of threatens her, asking for the money, and makes her feel scared, and that sends her back.
I think he lights matches and throws them onto her dress.
Yeah, he's very intimidating. Yeah. So her and Cary Grant go back to the hotel. He takes her there, but when they get back to her room, George Kennedy, who we didn't see this in the first scene in the funeral, I don't think, but we see it clearly here that he has a hook for one hand.
Yes.
Right? And he's been clearly searching her hotel room, and he's like, where is it? Where's the money? And I think Cary Grant actually didn't come to the room with her, but because she starts screaming bloody murder, he comes running up the stairs, and he goes in, and they have a bit of a fist fight, seemingly behind the door, which we don't see. We only see it from her perspective, which is, we see him go in, we hear some thuds and noises and whatnot, and then when she goes in, Cary Grant's sort of like lying on the floor. He's all right, but he gets up and he's like, okay, he must have went through the window. I'm going to, I'll go to pursue him. So lock the door. Don't leave. Don't let anyone in but me. And he goes out to the window in the balcony, and he sort of climbs over to the next room. And there's a bit of comedy here because he's going past like a random hotel window, and a woman screams and goes, "Stephen, another strange man just went past the window," which I thought was that's the thing. See, if she just yelled as a strange man at the window, that's not funny. But because she said a second strange man has just went past the window, that tells us something. It tells us that he came this way. Yeah. But it's also funny.
This sequence, because it's just clearly, I mean, obviously it's a set. You're not going to have someone dangling however high up in the air. But because it is obviously a set, and there's this little cutaway gag that has no major impact on the plot, this was the closest I felt it really got to Naked Gun. I could see Leslie Nielsen being in Cary Grant's place there. Oh yeah, and it playing the exact same.
Yeah. So he goes to the next window, and he's sort of he's got his back up at the edge of the window. He's listening to George Kennedy, who's with Tex, and he's with the old sneezy man, and they're talking about finding the money, and they're talking about what's just happened. And then after a few sentences, Cary Grant just walks in the window and agrees with something they said. And this is your first sort of Cary Grant twist, is that he's working on some capacity with them. And it's like, oh no, this is all a ruse. He's getting close to her. He's taking the tactic of befriending her so that she'll eventually trust him and just give him whatever he wants over. And you're like, oh no, what a reveal. So he tells them to back off. All they're doing is making his job harder by... although I would argue that scaring her like that and driving her into his arms for protection probably did help a little bit. If this was the tactic, this actually would have helped a little bit at least.
For sure. I think it's more so an issue of you don't want to scare her to the point where she's just going to leave entirely.
Yes.
Because he'll have no ability to convince her that no, I'm tagging along with you for your safety as you flee the country.
Yes, and that's obviously not the entire truth yet, but this is where you are at this point in the movie. And it feels like, okay, this is about the end of Act 1. This feels like the right time to reveal something like this. So the first time viewing this, you might actually think, okay, that this is now set up what the plot is. Now this is the movie, is that he's trying to get this from her, and it's all going to be a tension game of her, maybe finding out that she can't trust them, so on and so on. Obviously, it flips things around within about another 15 minutes so that you're sort of keeping your toes again, but...
Yeah, you say someone might think that. I did think that. I was like, okay, that's it. We now know we can't trust him. And the whole movie's just going to be that slow tension of revealing, who's going to give up the game first.
Which, to be fair, would have been a good movie, I think. That would have been a fine movie. But obviously, this is not what that is. This goes in its own way. So, remind me... so the first way she finds out is that George Kennedy is not happy with this agreement. He thinks that because Cary Grant's character wasn't in their platoon, he wasn't part of their secret little group who stole this money, he doesn't deserve any of the shares. So he storms out and he slams the door. And because of his anger, he actually calls Audrey Hepburn. So Cary Grant goes back to Audrey Hepburn's room and says, hey, I got the room next door. And he actually got that from one of the other guys because they already had the room next door. Yeah. Notably, the other side, not the one with the screaming woman for the gag that we just had. But, so they set that up, and the phone goes, and it's George Kennedy in a phone booth, and he's like, you can't trust him, he's working with us, he wants the money too. And he's just sabotaging, his plan out of... out of
And
spite.
he specifically throws out the name Dial.
Yes.
Dyle. He says that.
He says his name is Dial, yeah.
He says his Dial there, and it's like, I don't know any Dial. It's like, yeah, you do. It's that guy beat me up. He's not to be trusted. Click.
So, and this one is resolved relatively quickly because obviously she gets very tense. She gets, and that's the thing when he says, I've got the room next door, like, all of a sudden that's like a horror movie moment. Instead of being this comforting thing, she's just found out she can't trust him, so she's like, So this is where the movie's firing on all cylinders at this point. I think the moment it reveals Cary Grant is working with them, that's where I'm like, okay, I'm like so into the plot of this movie now and what it's doing. And then obviously it keeps playing things up. And when she does confront him with like his name, she's like, well, I can explain that. I'm Dial's brother. So Dial was the last man on the team, right? And then who stole the money. And they left him for dead. And he's the brother who's looking into it. And that's what he's saying he is now. He's the brother of the dead man on the team who's looking for the money, but he's not really working with them. He's working against them. So it is worth noting that throughout all of this, there was a whole big thing where like she tries to leave the room and he gives chase, and it's this whole big thing going on. She actually dupes him. She's able to like trick him with the taxi cabs and sort of stays back hidden. And she goes and meets Walter Matthau's character, the CIA guy, which she calls CIO because CIA is such a new term at this time period. She has no idea what it's called. That one threw me off. I was like, wow, to be in a period where CIA is just not a known thing. I mean, I suppose it is a relatively new thing at the time. But yeah, so she goes to see Bartholomew, who explains, okay, that this guy, okay, so maybe says, okay, so you must have this money somewhere. You're going to have to try and find it. And you're going to have to be careful around these guys. And so it's like, okay, all right. And she says, hey, you'll have to find out more about this guy. So it almost starts to look as if he's recruiting her to spy on him. So you get this kind of counter spy thing going on. And it's like, okay. We're really playing with the players now. We're really setting them up against each other. And she's trying to flip the tables. And it leads to a couple of fun little sequences where she's following Cary Grant. She follows him through the street. And this poor French man... Actually, no, he's not French. He's German, because he says Fräulein. We're in Paris, which is why I said French, but obviously he says Fräulein, so he's German. Where she's in a trench coat, she's got dark glasses on, she's got a scarf around her head. She's trying to look inconspicuous, but obviously looks the most dodgy because of that. Oh, yeah. She's following Cary Grant down the street, and he keeps like almost turning around for various reasons. And she sort of like sits next to this guy in an outdoor coffee shop, and the guy's like, hello, Fräulein. Hello. Right? And she gets back up to follow Cary Grant when he moves again. And this guy like stands up and says, oh, hey, no, please come sit back down. What's your name? And she's like, no, go away. I don't want to talk to you. And he's like, oh, okay, that's weird. So he feels like rejected, and it's weird because she's sat next to him, but he goes back to his table. But then it's right after she does that, Cary Grant is bumped into, and he turns around again, and she immediately turns around, walks the other way, and grabs this German guy's arm and pretends she's talking to him. And then within seconds again, ditches him and tells him to get lost or she'll call the police. And I'm like, you know what? You're being gaslit this entire movie. This poor man has just been put through the ringer with this interaction.
I was going to say, I feel like everybody who even tangentially interacts with these people are just so much worse off for it.
Yes. So, I don't know. It's all very entertaining. And she puts a call out for him at the... it's like the mail place. It's some place where he's getting his mail forwarded to. And it is worth noting that he goes in and asks for... Dial. He does say like I'm picking up the mail for Dial, and they say no mail available, and so he begins to walk out before he gets the call. So it seems to confirm at that point that is definitely his real identity. It seems to. Obviously, in hindsight, I think the way you read this scene is that he's fishing to see if he can get some clues by pretending to be this Dial. But obviously, and when she actually ends up in a phone booth and he gets I've never heard this in real life, like someone over the comms, there's a phone call for Mr. Dial, phone booth number 4 please, and he goes to phone booth 4 and she chats to him. Go on.
I feel like obviously it's a product of the times where people didn't have their own phones and whatnot. If somebody knew that you were at a place, they were able to call you up and say, hey, can you connect me with so-and-so? And this just happens to be an airport or mail place, I guess.
Yeah. No, I get that part. It's just the idea of being like them having like, you know, a series of phone booths that are numbered, and it's just no, like this happens so often. They have an entire system set up for multiple, you know, calls at the same time.
As last month's Chungking Express showed, businesses just randomly take phone calls of anybody who wants to place one. So
this makes more sense here, though, I think.
It does.
In the context of this building and place of work.
Yes.
So she's actually talking to him on the phone and, like, you know, saying, okay, I know who, like, your dial, you're this, you're that. And he actually gets taken away at gunpoint, right? Because he disappears. Like, he just stops answering, and she goes to check the booth. He's missing. And it turns out George Kennedy's shown up, and he has him at gunpoint. And I have to say, if there's one moment to show you that this is supposed to be at least partially a comedy, the fact that he holds the gun with his hook is definitely one of those little moments.
I even called that one out. I'm like, please do it. I want to see how you're going to do this.
And I'm like, can you even fire it when you're holding it just in the hook? Because
I mean, I know there are some, because it looks like a fairly mechanical hook. It doesn't look like it's just set in place. So I wonder if he does have some minor control to like pinch with it.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. He doesn't. He never does, but I wonder if he did.
This ends up with a big fight in the roof, though, where there's a sort of slidey, because he waits and he holds him at gunpoint in the stairwell until the place closes, and then they go up to the roof. And he demands to know where the money is. He thinks this is a running thing in this movie as well, is that everyone doesn't trust that everyone else doesn't know where the money is, even though no one clearly does. But they all keep thinking someone else does. And he fights Cary Grant, but it ends with George Kennedy sliding off the edge of this roof. He doesn't fall to his death. Luckily, his hook, keeps him on the edge,
just hanging around.
I actually really loved how this scene looked, though, because when he slides like off this like slanted part of the roof. It does look he's just sliding into shadow. It just goes into like darkness.
Oh, yeah, no. This entire fight, I mean, this is, save for the very end, really, this is the only major fight scene in this movie. This is the only scene where there's actually like a physical altercation. And I think it really works. I think this was a very well choreographed and structured fight scene, just in a general sense, let alone for the time or anything like that.
Certainly for the time period it holds up, because I think fight scenes in old, like whenever you watch an old Star Trek and they're doing the double axe handles to the back and stuff like that, it feels really goofy. This for the time period is pretty solid and has some tension. There
was a point in it where the hook-handed man slashes Cary Grant across the back, and it's a solid effect. They just basically do it all in one take, it seems like. I'm sure there was probably some cut there to make it really sell it, but it felt like he actually got slashed in the back there.
So he goes back to the hotel, and this is where she starts to trust him a bit more again. He starts to explain that, no, I'm his brother. This is what they did. I kind of jumped to that when I was just going through the twist earlier, but when she sees that he's injured and he's got this big slash on his back, she's like, okay, like, let me help you. Let's see. She rips the shirt open and they start having banter again. They start having this back and forth as she's helping patch him up, and the trust is kind of reformed at this point. So that's that, and then I think it's after this we get our first like murder. Well, excluding the opening, obviously, with the dead body in the train, but we get our first actual kill.
Yeah, I think at this point, the three guys basically just knock on the door and say, hey, we're here for the money.
Yes. And they search... Yeah, they agree to all search each other's rooms. That's what this next bit is. You're right. So they basically say, look, you don't trust us, then search your rooms. And we don't really trust you bad guys either, so how about we search your rooms? So they all swap keys, and they all go and search each other's rooms. And they're looking for different stuff. There's like a whole moment where they think they've found something in George Kennedy's room, but it turns out to be a case with just an extra, like a spare hook in it. So, but there's a whole big moment where he goes up and gets the case, and they're all like standing around it.
I just realized as I watched that scene, so the scene plays out is that they actually have kidnapped the young boy. They kidnapped the young boy, Jean-Louis, the son of the friend, and in order to basically say, hey, you're going to help us or this kid is going to get it.
We've barely mentioned him, but yes, her work friend, the one who shot her with the water gun at the start, and the one who has an interest in collecting stamps, which is important for later.
But he shows up here, and he points out, like, oh, if I had to hide something, I hide it up on that cupboard. And so they search it. And as she's picking it up, she says, oh, this could be it. It's really heavy. And Jean-Louis, being an idiot, goes around screaming to everyone up and down the hall, we did it, we won, we found it. So then everyone converges on the room, and Reggie plays dumb. She's like, we didn't find anything. And Jean-Louis, being an idiot, points it out and says, no, it's up there. So Tex goes and checks it out, and as he goes to check it out, he basically lifts it up with one hand. And between those two shots of her saying it's really heavy and then him lifting it with one hand, I was waiting for that to be the payoff. That in that little interstitial, she got whatever was inside of it out. But I'm only realizing now as we recount it, that didn't happen.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the sort of thing where I guess you call it a slight red herring. I think it's there for the moment because everyone's there except George Kennedy, because obviously he would just say, it's my spare hook, if he was standing there. And it becomes this thing, where is he then? And then he turns up dead, and it's Cary Grant's room, his bathtub. He turns up there in the water. And they do actually bring in the police. There's actually a scene where they're with the policeman again, and all there's all the surviving members of this cast are there. And the policeman's like demanding to know what's going on, and they're like, well, we were all in the other rooms. We didn't see who killed him.
I especially love it because he was drowned. He was murdered by drowning. And they were like, well, we don't want him to be in Cary Grant's bedroom because then he'll be the obvious suspect. So we're just going to put him back in his bed. And so they get him dressed in PJs. They put him back in bed. And then the cop is like, he drowned in his bed? Okay.
Yeah, I love that it doesn't explain that. You just see the maid like open his door in the morning and he's lying in bed dead. And it's clear that they've moved him. So there's been a whole, like... I could almost see like a comedy scene that they could have had. Maybe they even cut out with them like carrying his body and some hijinks while they're moving. But
full on Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah, but they didn't do that, obviously. They skipped ahead. Which does make it punchy, to be fair, though, because you get hit with the realization of what they've done.
And that's what I was saying, though, with those ironic cuts, as we were saying before. Once you get into the comedy of it, you understand what kind of humor to expect. That's when it really starts working.
So they all don't trust each other, and now they're convinced that someone amongst them is actively killing off the others because they want the money. Probably starting with her husband in the train at the start of the film, but that same person is probably... So we've got a murder mystery effectively on our hands now as well. So the plot just keeps kind of getting more interesting as it ramps up. And like it's not till after this but the next murder happens, and it's the old sneezy man who turns up dead next. He is like lured out to the elevator at night, and he gets killed in the elevator, and it's reasonably gruesome for the time period, because when the elevator comes back up and he's lying there bloody, and the guard or whoever it is sees him, I'm like, that's it's not bad. And this all takes place the same night that Cary Grant takes out Audrey Hepburn to make her feel better, to calm her down, because they're having like a really nice time before this. This is because it's after they leave the police station where the Notre Dame moment happens. He buys her an ice cream, and she ends up like hitting him in the chest with it by accident. So his suit's all ruined, and he's like, "Oh, it's strip dry." And we get this whole sequence where they go back to the hotel, and he wants to go and take a bath or have a shower, and she's like, "You really want to take a bath in the bathtub where that guy died, like literally last night?" And he's like, whatever. And she's like, "No, come shower with me." And she even like there's a bit of playful trickery to like get him into her room because he doesn't want to. She screams as if she's been attacked so that he'll come running in. And then to be playful, he just goes out of the shower with his clothes on and makes some jokes about it, being drip dry, and how it keeps the shape if you wash it while you're wearing it. And it's all this playful stuff, and it feels like it is properly becoming a giggly romantic comedy, despite the fact that there was a murder last night. And then the shoe drops, though. This is when she gets the phone call from Bartholomew, who says, "Yeah, Dale never had a brother." And all of a sudden, the tone drops immediately again, and she's like, and he even points that out. They go out for dinner, and at this point, she can't just run away because it would look too suspicious. He's like, you were like coming on so strong, like an hour ago, and now like you're so cold and you're so distant. Like, what's happening? What's going on? And when she just straight up asks and says he didn't have a brother, he's like, "Well, I can explain that." It's like, oh, can you now? Like, yeah, well, I'm a career thief, basically. Like, I go looking for money that people,
yes.
Rich people won't miss it.
I did completely lie to you before, but this time you can trust me. And I think it is around this part where, oh no, it's during the, I think it's actually during the shower scene where he throws out this concept. He's like, hey, there's two tribes of Indians. One is known for always telling the truth and one is known for always lying. You asked a Indian what tribe he's from, and he says he's from the one that tells the truth. How can you tell? How can you know whether or not he's telling the truth? And then she asks, like, okay, which one are you? And he says, I'm the one that tells the truth. And so it instills that idea of, like, no matter what he says, can you still trust him at that point? So when he says, at this point, I'm a career thief, my name is Adam, she doesn't quite fully accept it. She runs with it, but you can tell there's that hesitation where she's like, oh, fool me once, shame on you, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the audience does expect more swerving, but maybe you kind of get away with this one because he's sort of admitting to a negative thing here, so it kind of feels like, oh, maybe there's more to this persona. But at this point, no, because you've already had these swerves twice now, I expect a third. And I think the genius of the movie is that you kind of expect the third to be, oh no, he actually is the murderer, he's the dangerous one. And then that's not the swerve, though, ultimately. It makes it, it looks like that for a bit, obviously.
True, but I do think this movie was actually kind of clever with the way it presented the names, because we almost kind of already had a third in that the very first one, we're told that his name is Dial. And she calls into Bartholomew and says, hey, this Dial guy. And Bartholomew says, that's impossible. Dial is dead. And so we're left to imply that, like, this guy is the Dial that we're talking about. And then it's only like 10, 15 minutes later that we get the shift to, no, actually, he's the brother. So we almost already had that first swerve, making this to be the third.
So, despite that, though, she kind of, like, still gets flirty with him anyway and still kind of gets lovey-dovey.
Immediately.
Yeah. Well, they're on this boat going through France and, the boat guy shines like a spotlight on people who are making out next to the river, and it's like, okay.
I guess it's supposed to be romantic, but, like, I can imagine being on either side of that spotlight, and I don't like it.
Yeah, that's fair. But of course, the big thing next is, okay, we're going to have to try and work together to beat those other assholes. Because I think at this point, she at least doesn't think he's the murderer, so I may as well work with him until we can figure out what's going on. Yep. And they figure out that they look through the bag of items again that he had on him, the husband. Nothing's telling them anything. But then she eventually, like, they realize because of the report or list of things that were in it, there was something missing. There was like a not a diary, but like it
was a planner,
appointment book, yeah. And he had an appointment at this location in the park. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe that's something we can go look at. And even this has got a whole funny hijinks scene where she's back at her job. She's a translator. So there's this, like, important meeting going on with all these delegates in a room, and they're all speaking different languages. And her job is to translate the French into English when someone's speaking in French. And Cary Grant comes into her little booth, because she's in a little booth with a microphone and some headphones. And he's like, oh, can you talk right now? And she's like, yeah, fine. I'm not, there's no French happening right now, so yes. And he's like, okay, well, I think it's this appointment. I think it's this. And she's like, okay, sorry, shut up, I need to go back to work. There's someone talking in French. And she's translating. And he's kissing her neck and putting her off as she's trying to translate. And then she keeps translating for, like, maybe 5 more seconds. And then she remembers what was in the appointment book and just says that into the mic instead. And, like, every guy in the room turns around and looks at her.
He's like, huh? What?
Yeah.
What's going on?
And then Cary Grant says, yeah, go about your business, gentlemen. And then they both run off to this location in the park.
I do like how they immediately acknowledge as soon as they get to the park. She's like, well, I'm fired.
Yeah. Their job's not going to be waiting for her.
Nope.
But obviously, Tex, the last remaining other guy who's alive, right, from the group, he's also here because he had the appointment book. And they're looking for whatever was here. Maybe there's a clue. Maybe there's some sort of trace. And the big reveal of the movie is that the money was basically converted into stamps. There's these rare stamps that were purchased to basically hide the money in plain sight, because this letter that he left for her in her belongings had these 3 stamps on it, and those are worth 250 grand. And Tex realizes this, then Cary Grant realizes this. He tells her this, and she's like, I gave the stamps to the little boy who loves stamp collecting, and they go hunting for him because he's there to trade the stamps, because that's what all the stands are where people trade their stamps.
Yes, so very close, but actually what happened was Tex and Cary Grant, they both realize it independently, and they leave her alone as they race back to the hotel.
Oh, she realizes it on her own as well. Okay,
she realizes it on her own. She's like, oh, right, he'd be here for the stamps. And I do want to point out that there was a scene maybe about 10-15 minutes prior where Cary Grant and Reggie are looking through the bag one more time. And it was only at that scene that it clicked. I was like, why were there stamps on it if it was unsealed? Got that. So it was like 10 to 15 minutes where I was like, okay, I know the build up to it. But like you said in the beginning, it's so hijinksy and fun that I didn't care. I didn't care by the time we got there. I was like, yeah, no, but I'm still having a good time all throughout. Yeah. And it even doubled down in the fact of when the reveal happens, we don't know where the stamps are.
Yes.
So it's able to even twist it in that regard.
And when they find the kid who's like, he comes here to do his stamp trading. Kids were into weird things in the 60s. What can I say?
They didn't have Pokemon cards. What were they supposed to
do? But he traded, he got a big bag of stamps. He's like, yeah, I traded those 3 for this big bag. I've had a great day. And they tracked down the guy that took the stamps. And as soon as they walk in, he's like, yeah, I knew you'd be coming. Like, I'm not a thief. Like, I wanted to check these out and see if they were authentic, and they are. This one's worth $100,000. This one's worth 60. Blah blah blah. And they've all got a story. And he's like, here you go. And she pays him for the stamps. He gave the boy, but she gets to keep the stamps. So this is just a nice man. This is just a nice man who knows what they're worth.
This is the only genuine person in this entire story.
Yeah, everyone else is lying all the time. Well, maybe not Regina. I mean, I think you could argue any lying she does, she's forced into because everyone else around her is lying to her constantly.
That's fair, yeah. It is worth noting that at this point, Cary Grant and Tex have made their way back to the hotel.
Yes.
And they realize that the stamps are not there. And so at this point, Reggie returns to the hotel room and finds Tex is killed.
He's got a bag over his head, yeah. He's been suffocated and he's like tied to the radiator, yeah. And he's like written the word dial on the floor with his finger, which I will say, I don't know how someone who suffocates like that would have time to write a name. Like, because it's not like someone's suffocating them. It's not like they leave them almost dead and like still dying. You have to suffocate them till they're dead.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit weird.
I would say the only option would be if like it was a bag that had like a zip tie and the zip tie was around his neck. So that way he slowly starts going out. But even then, that's not how it was in the movie. It was like up around his nose by the time that she got in. So yeah, that little plot hole, tiny little one there.
It's a little thing. But this is pointing the finger at Cary Grant's character and saying, because this is what he knew him as was Dale. So it's like, no, this is saying that he is the murderer. And this means that, this is the lowest she's ever trusted him in the movie. And it becomes this thing when he does try to interact with her, we end up with this chase, because now she has the stamps. Cary Grant seemingly wants the stamps, and it leads to this chase where she goes down into...
And she does call Bartholomew right before this chase starts, and they set up a meeting to get this basically offloaded from her. So
she's trying to get to him with the stamps, and she's running through the subway, really old school looking trains actually, so interesting seeing 1960s subway trains in Paris, but and there's a whole thing, it does that classic thing where he's trying to get on the same train as her, he's trying to see if she's getting out or on or off, and there's a whole tense sequence where there's almost no one at this part of the station where she's run up and she's hiding in this phone booth and he's like looking around for her, and here it's playing it like, no, he's maybe coming to kill her because he wants these stamps, and she's calling the US Embassy and she's asking for Bartholomew, and I think like if you hadn't already predicted that Bartholomew might also be lying and maybe there's something fishy with him, this is the moment where you're probably starting to get that rush of feelings. So eventually when this operator calls Bartholomew and this guy we've never seen before answers and says, I've never heard of this woman, what are you talking about? Someone's getting murdered. You're like, oh no. So he's like, okay. And I think if I was to say something's predictable, at this point, I definitely expected one more swerve where Cary Grant turned out to be good. I felt like at a certain point, because of when they made them look bad, I was like, okay, the law of just like swings and roundabouts just means that we're probably going to find out he's good by the very end. But I think the thing that was predictable, though, more than anything, is that as we're doing this murder mystery element comes in and we're suspecting each of the men in the group, including Cary Grant, I think there's a certain point where I'm like, you know what? The surprising one is the CIA guy, and he's who I think is the bad guy. And I didn't predict exactly who he was or, why or, anything like that. But that part kind of like just felt right from about halfway in the movie,
Well, I also think that that's a smart choice on the movie because they basically dropped the CIA guy about halfway through the movie. They had him get less and less involved as she became more involved in her own plot with Cary Grant. But it's only at this point when she calls him back up that, first off, you're reminded of it, and then second off, you're like, reminded like, oh, wait, hold on, if Cary Grant's going to be the good guy still. Because just from a meta-analysis, like, of course the guy who's top billed in this 60s thing is not going to end up being the villain of the whole story. Like, it just doesn't seem right for a Cary Grant role, but going into it, you know that there has to still be a bad guy, and the CIA agent is the only one that we're still introduced to. We still have exposition for. So you're right, it just feels right at that point that he's the guy.
It plays into this theme of the movie where it's all about Cary Grant constantly pretending to be someone else, and then the twist is that this other guy's also pretending to be someone else the entire time. So it works thematically in the movie. I think the first time I watched it, I was expecting, when she's calling the embassy, I was like, oh, this woman's going to say who? She's going to be like, have no idea who she's talking about. That's what I thought. And then it basically does the same thing, just in a slightly different way. But I thought that's how it was going to play out, is that she was just going to not know who that was. So Cary Grant's looking for it, and she's running, she's hiding. And there's like one really ominous shot of Walter Matthau's character, the CIA guy, standing in like an archway. Because, we end up with the chase that eventually happens is in all these pillars. Right? Looks very good.
Such a well-shot scene. Yeah. This is such a well-shot scene.
But she's running from Cary Grant. It's a proper chase, and like she gets to the point where she's running towards Matthau. Cary Grant's behind her, and she ends up in the middle. And both Matthau and Grant pull out their guns, and they're hiding behind the pillars. And she's standing right in the middle, not knowing who to trust. And Cary Grant's yelling, "That's Dial. That's why Tex wrote Dial on the floor, because he actually recognized the real Dial. That's him. He's not dead." And eventually Walter Matthau does say, yeah, they left me for dead. They thought they killed me, but they left me there. And I'm back for my revenge and my money. And she obviously for a bit... Before that, he's like, no, I'm the CIA. He can't trust him. He's dangerous.
Yeah. I love... This is a point where Audrey Hepburn does a fantastic job. Because obviously... She's been scared up to this point. She's been confused, and they play it very well. But there is always this comedic undertone to it, no matter what she's doing. At this point in the movie, though, as soon as the chase scene starts, the comedic undertone drops, and it becomes just full thriller. And I think she does a fantastic job of just... She has reached the point where, like, she just has a mental breakdown. She is just unable to know what to do here.
Yeah, and I think... she probably starts to lean more towards Cary Grant, trust-wise, because once Walter Matthau admits that he is Dial and that, he's killed other people, it's like, obviously, okay, right, regardless of all the lies Cary Grant said, like, this CIA guy's been lying the whole time anyway, right? Oh, yeah. It is more dangerous. So we end up with this sort of three-way chase where they end up in, like a theater, in, like, an opera house theater, and... She ends up hiding in the... I don't even know what you call it. The little... So see when there's like an orchestra and you have the conductor, but they're like lowered down and they're in this little box with a window at the front of the stage.
I think that pit is specifically for like people to read out lines. So if someone's on stage and they forget... Because it's not facing towards the orchestra. It's just a tiny little head hole.
Okay, fair. I've definitely seen this with an orchestra, though, with a conductor in the little box like that.
But, like, it's in that same sort of area, but this one is just a little cubby that's only facing, like, right in center stage, and I think it's just to say, like, here's your line.
Well, regardless, she's hiding in there, and, Matthau's looking for her, or Matthau, I said Matthau. Matthau.
We all know what you mean.
And Cary Grant's trying to get in, but he can't get in the door to the stage, so he ends up underneath the stage, and we get this great set piece where Matthau's realised where she is, and he's walking towards her saying, I know where you are, Mrs. Lampert, I'm coming for you. And Cary Grant's under the stage, but he's noticed that this stage is made up of entirely trapdoors. Now, I don't know how realistic this is. I would imagine that a stage would have maybe a couple of trapdoors, and you would just perform so that you end up in the right spot. But this stage is just nothing but trapdoors, so there's a whole grid that are all numbered, A1, A2, B1, B2, so on. And Cary Grant is next to this panel of levers, and he's trying to just tell by sound which one Walter Matthau's on. And it's like, so maybe this stage is unrealistic, but it's a great little set piece because he's just trying to, by sound alone, figure out which one he's on.
And there's, it's that ticking clock. As soon as he manages to get to her, she's dead. So he has to do it before that point. But he's, it's a moving target. It's just a perfectly tense scene throughout.
And I think what's great about it is that this is the first time really in the whole movie where we can actually just throw everything to the side and genuinely believe that he's trying to save her. Because up until this point, there's a constant, is he in it for himself? Does he really care about her? Is he even dangerous to her? But here it feels like, no, he's trying to make the right choice because he needs to save her. And, like you say, like she's dead if he gets to her. So it feels like, okay, now we can do away with the pretense and we can actually have him genuinely just kind of be a hero in the moment. And sure enough, he picks the right door. And Matthau falls, like 10 feet and lands on his feet, but obviously his legs are probably broken.
Yeah, he ain't doing so hot.
I feel like in a modern movie they'd probably make this more gruesome, where you probably see like a leg snap. Here it's just,
I mean, not to spoil too much, but spoilers for The Prestige, they did.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Well, it's not a spoiler because that'll already be out by the time this goes out.
I'm just saying for people who didn't watch that review. Watch that review. What's wrong with you?
So, yeah, and the movie, it does this thing where she's with Cary Grant and they're in a car and she's like, tell me to go and...
She's getting a foot massage.
That's right. Because now she's like, okay, I know you're not a bad guy now, so back to the flirting, massage my feet. And she's like, look... You're going to be good about this. You're going to tell me to go to the embassy tomorrow and turn it, because this money belongs to the US government technically. Yes. You're going to tell me to go and do this, right? You're going to support my decision to go and turn this money in. And he's like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. But he goes with her the next day. They go up, and I love how she just at the front, like, she asks a guard, hey, could you tell me where I'd go about returning government money that's been stolen? And this guy just smiles and goes, oh, that would probably be the Treasury Department up here. And I'm like, you wouldn't have more questions or direct her to like an investigator or something? I don't know.
I fully feel that it's equivalent to if I walked into a police station and says like, hi, who would I talk to if I killed somebody?
Oh, you just go to room 2.
Oh, okay, thank you. Have a nice day.
That's what it's like. But she's going up, and just before they get into the room where the receptionist is, he says like, I can't go in. Seeing you hand this money over will turn my stomach. And it's like, okay, fair enough. And honestly, I'm like, okay, I know exactly what's about to happen.
This one caught me off guard. I didn't see it coming.
Yeah, no, but obviously I didn't this time because it was my second viewing. But the first viewing, the second he wasn't going in with her, I'm like, I know exactly how this is about to end.
See, I thought the way it was going to end is that it would be sort of like a bittersweet thing where she goes in, she delivers the money, and when she comes out, he's gone. And it was revealed like maybe this really was all about the money. So I thought that's the way we're going, but clearly I'm an idiot because
we do this thing where she goes in, she asks receptionist, he's like, oh, he's in there, you can go in, and she walks in, and Cary Grant is sitting at the table. This is where he works. This is his real job. Is he tracks down money for the government, and that's why he's been involved in all this from the start, and everything's been a lie. And at a certain point, he clearly could have told her this towards the end and just didn't because he's having fun with her. And she's livid at him in kind of a fun way. And what was funny is that, Joe, sometimes your memory plays tricks on you where you remember a certain thing happening a certain way. I remember from my first viewing him spinning in the chair. I thought she walked in and his back was to her and he spun round and revealed who he was.
He does the Doctor No, where he's just like, hello.
I thought he did that, but he doesn't. He's just sitting there. But that was my memory, just adding an extra little detail. But and she's mad at him. She's like, okay, what's your real name then? She's like, whatever. And
Brian.
And
I only mentioned that because we said it's the least cool name of all.
And she's like, how am I meant to even believe that? I want identification right now. I want you to prove. And he's like, okay, I'll put it in a marriage license in like a week, but just, you know, give me the stamps. And she keeps arguing with him, and then 30 seconds later goes, wait, did you say marriage license? And then she starts smiling because she's just happy now that he's basically just proposed. And it ends with them, you know, she's trying to kiss him and he's trying to get the stamps, and we get the end scene, and that's...
I do want to point out two things in this ending scene, though, because it is strange. First is the line she throws out saying how she hopes that they have a lot of boys so that they can name all of them after him.
Yes, all 4 names that he's used.
Yep. They're going to have a Peter, an Alex, Adam, and a Brian. But the other thing is, this was such a strange the end screen. It's something I haven't really seen before, where it goes into a, for lack of a better term, Brady Bunch style, like 9-panel grid. And it just shows like clips from the rest of the movie of things that we've seen them go through.
I mean, it's in context because she basically describes his like 4 aliases, and each of the corners is his, because it's not, you say it's a 9-panel grid, but there's like black in the
right,
up, down, left, and right. Yeah. So you've got like basically the original one in, you know, the Alps. You've got the one that was sneaking around. You've got the one who like was potentially a murderer. You got the one who's in the shower. And then in the middle, it's like this moment of her trying to kiss him. So, you know, it does make sense in context. They're just sort of saying, hey, he's been all these personas throughout the movie.
Right. So, no. It was just it was such a, because the movie has done nothing that stylistic with its delivery so far. It's always just been a cinematic feel. It was just strange that at the very end there, they just were like, yeah, all right, here's a little mini reminder of what we've been through.
Yeah. I think this movie's super fun. Like, it keeps you on your toes. They're very likable characters. They're obviously, the romance being as quick as it is quite dated. And there's the odd little dated line. You know, I think at one point he says something about, oh, all you women do this, and it kind of feels like, yeah, you wouldn't say that now in a movie because it would come across as very unlikable.
Now listen here, dames.
But like, they're firing back at each other. The twists and the turns. Like, at a certain point, it's it's really, like, the first time it really twists with them, it's like, oh, that's really exciting. Oh, this is what the plot really is. And the second time, you're like, oh, we're twisting again. But then by the time you get to the third time, you're like, oh no, this is fun now, because now I'm like anticipating the next twist and turn, and we're sort of, you know, we're being playful with it. And I think the tone of what this movie is helps it get away with that, because I think in a more serious movie I might get annoyed if it kept trying to like pull the rug out from me at a certain point, where you know, let me settle in and really get invested in these characters. But this movie, like, it's got such a solid handle of like what it wants to evoke in the audience. It's about giving us the fun of questioning if she should trust this guy or not, and then constantly going back and forth if we should.
I feel like the less competent would just be the equivalent of, say, like a soap opera, where it's just every scene ends with that big shock of like, oh no, this horrible thing has changed. But this one plays it off intelligently. It always manages to make it feel like they're never just flying by the seat of their pants or doing a twist because they can. It feels like it always plays towards the larger picture. Yeah.
And, you know, that moment at the end when he turns around, it's like, yeah, of course this was the one final, like, character reveal, because all this time, because she even says, like, you weren't even telling the truth about being a crook, and he's like, I thought you'd be pleased to find that I'm not a crook.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, no, it's a delightful time. I think they're super endearing. The thriller elements work really well. I was very surprised when I saw this. It was such a unique movie, and even in the time period, it feels like it sort of sticks out against those Hitchcockian type movies that were sort of common. So
that being said, I did see several things that were reviewing it at the time said that this is the Hitchcock film that wasn't Hitchcock. They were really still comparing it even at the time. So
I guess that was the thing to compare it to. So. But I think it stands up on its own merit. I think it stands out as a film that's different from those, that it's its own unique type of thing. And like I said, it's the director of Singing in the Rain, who went on to do. What was funny is that I've seen another film from this guy, which is a cheesy science fiction B movie called Saturn III that he did like much later in his career. So he clearly like went down the totem pole of Hollywood a little bit, where he was doing these smaller films. It did have, I think it had Kirk Douglas in it, so it did have a big star, but it was still a relatively kind of like low brow movie, you know.
All right, fair enough. I do want to say, just through my random Wikipedia searches here, Universal back in 2002 did a full-on remake of this film.
Really?
Because I guess they were like, oh, hey, let's get that out of the public domain if we can. Directed by the guy who did Silence of the Lambs.
Jonathan Demme, yeah.
Jonathan Demme. And we have Regina is played by, I always get her name wrong, but Thandie Newton, I believe.
I think it's Tandy Newton's how you pronounce it.
Tandy Newton, my bad. But the greatest one for you is that Cary Grant is being replaced by the world-famous actor Mark Wahlberg.
Oh, my God.
Needless to say, it did not do well.
What was it called? Was it still called Charade?
No, it was called The Truth About Charlie.
That sounds awful.
It is, apparently.
That sounds awful. Well... replacing Cary Grant with Mark Wahlberg. I couldn't be more disgusted if I tried. Don't get me wrong, there is obviously that other thing in the time period where he is twice her age in this. Like,
yes.
Let's just acknowledge that.
I actually did the calculation here. He was about 45. No, he was about 45, I think, and she was 30 something.
Okay.
No, sorry. It was 50 and 35. That was it.
50 and 30. I was going to say, I mean, even for 50, it feels like he's actually, like, people looked older back in the day. Like, this is a joke that comes up a lot with Cheers, is like, this is Kelsey Grammer when he first debuted in Cheers, and he was like 27, and you look at it and go, he looks like he's 45. What are you talking about? There's no way he was younger than me when he started in Cheers, but yeah, he was.
Always throws me off. I have the same problem nowadays anytime I watch any YouTube creators who are younger than me, and I look at them and I'm like, you're like 12, how are you doing this?
You're babies. Alex Shredder from Turtles 2. They're babies. Anyway, so Charade is a delightful time, comes highly recommended, and I think that leads into us rating the film. I'm curious where you'll go with this one.
Same. I mean, I definitely really enjoyed it. I think there is something to be said that this movie is pretty much one of the first ones that I would say doesn't have any real, like, artsy-fartsy stuff to it. It doesn't feel like it really has this deeper pronounced meaning or like the examination of a theme or something like that. It feels smart, it feels well done, but it isn't one of those ones that when I say Criterion Collection, you typically think of.
Yeah, it's kind of more. It's just excellent at what it does, right? And I feel like it's a movie, and what I mean to say by that is that it's being playful, it's using sets, it's using cinematography, and it's having fun with those elements that it's got in its its toy box effectively.
Yeah.
It feels like a filmmaker's movie where they just wanted to do something lighthearted and cheerful almost, to be honest.
Pretty much.
I guess in the same way that, like, I'm not saying this feels like a Tarantino movie, but in the same way when Tarantino makes a movie, it feels like, oh no, I want to do all these things that I love from other movies. It wouldn't necessarily have some big, deeper meaning, but he's going to direct the hell out of it and sort of make everything feel really cool and fun and have this energy. And that's kind of what this does for its type of movie that it's emulating. Yeah,
this movie, you can feel the talent behind it. You feel that this movie is very well made, and it had the full backing of whatever, Universal or whatever at that point. So overall, if I had to give it a solid rating, it's very different than the other Criterion films we did, but I think I would still put it at like a 9. I like I said, this is a movie where I was enraptured by the twists. I was not able to guess even half of them before they came out, but I definitely enjoyed it. The comedy made me laugh more than most modern comedies do, so overall, it was just a great time, and I think that this is a standout movie, especially in modern days. I mean, we're 60 years removed from this, and it still holds up just as well as it did, I mean, I'm assuming, when it came out.
Yeah. What'd the girlfriend think, since she watched it?
She was upset with them being romantically involved, but she actually managed to sit through and watch the whole thing, which is points for her.
Oh.
I have not gotten out of a Criterion film from her yet.
Didn't make it through. What have we done? Seven Samurai. That's
Nope.
crazy. Yeah, I think I'm landing on a 9 as well. It's I think it is such a different film, like you say, from a lot of the other movies you expect to see in the Criterion Collection, and it almost feels like I want to reward it for being this playful, different type of movie that is so good at what it is actually trying to execute, without just doing the intense thriller or the thoughtful drama that you maybe expect. It's a sort of thing where halfway through you're like, oh, maybe this is a lighter film, maybe it won't feel quite like the others that we're talking about with these types of films, but and then by the end you're like, you know what, it was so good at what it did that I think it deserves the praise anyway. Like, it's so up there. So
I think that ending chase scene is possibly better than most modern thrillers that I've seen. Just in the way that they build up the tension, and it's so simple the way they do it. They don't have to do these big, huge, like, car chases and stuff like that. It's just them being stuck in a row of pillars, and it's so tense as to who's going to make the first move.
Yeah. So there you go, 9 out of 10 from both, which is a 9 overall. So consider that our score for Charade. Next month, on Collector's Cut, the collection, we have another Kurosawa. We're going back to Kurosawa for a film that I have not seen before. It's one of his earlier films. It's called Drunken Angel. So look forward to that. And I know what David's about to say. We need to, is it making the cut? I know I
was going to
skip
say anything like that. What are you talking about?
You're out, does it make the cut? Does it make the cut? I'll cut you.
Oof. You know what? We just bumped up that Patreon thing to $20,000. Really got to make it worth it for me.
Plus an orange.
Yeah,
can't do it without an orange.
on top of it. All right, so I mean, I'm going to make the argument.
What does an orange cost these days? At $10?
Yeah, $10. I'm going to go ahead and make the argument for a cut above.
Oh,
do you think? I mean, I think that this is the sort of movie that, while it may not be something that everyone seeks out, I do think that it's something that deserves to be watched, and it is worth having around. I think that, I mean, it was apparently just within the last, I think, year or two, according to Wikipedia. Yeah, 2022. It was put into the National Film Registry for the Library of Congress, and I think it's fully earned that. I think that it is something that needs to be preserved.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting you to hit me with a cut above right away. I mean, obviously, it at least makes the cut, and there's no debating that. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm happy to put it in there. I don't really have a particular argument against it. If nothing else, it's like it's an example we can have if we have the cut above collection, if you will, of the films that have earned that rank. Most of which are from these Criterion episodes,
right?
And one from Extra Reels of all things. More on that in a minute. But I think I can agree with the cut above. Is something that is different to those other movies, that is exceptional at what it's doing, and variety is good. So by all means, cut above. And I mentioned Extra Reels, so it's a good time to promote. So over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, you can get yourself a bonus episode every month that will loosely tie into whatever the weekly show is doing. So you can do that. For example, this month, we don't even know what this month's bonus was yet. Never mind. But last month, for example, for Expendables, we did Showdown in Little Tokyo, which was a Dolph Lundgren movie, and there's things like that. But the $5 tier and up, you get access to Extra Reels, which is the opposite of this show. So this show is doing the best of the best. This is doing the Criterion Collection. That show is doing the anti-Criterion Collection, which is movies that are so bad that are hopefully good, but
hopefully.
We've done Neil Breen on there. We've done Miami Connection, Dangerous Men. I'm sure we'll get to the work of Tommy Wiseau at some point. But that's the type of material that you can expect on there. Some end up being entertaining, and some end up being torture. But that is that show. That is a Patreon exclusive. So by all means, go and check out all that stuff. And obviously, the main point of all that is that supporting us financially helps keep all the content coming, makes it sustainable. So if you like the shows, want to keep it happening, go and have a look. But that is the show. That is Collector's Cut, the collection. Hopefully you enjoyed a bit of a lighter film this month, and I think next month with Drunken Angel, not only is it Kurosawa, I believe we have a cop or a corrupt cop or something like that it's about. I don't know, I've never seen it. I'm going off on, second-hand passive information here. So we'll join you for that, but thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and in the words of Martin Scorsese, this is cinema.